Hi, everybody. It's my pleasure and privilege to moderate the second open session. We're going to start with a presentation on designing ritual space, sustaining community, the search for a common language of ritual space. Doug himself handed me this one.
Pick up both.
Oh, I have to use both?
Yes.
This one and this one. Okay, thank you. Doug and I have known each other a long time. It's nice to see you again. And I have a terrible cold. So it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Tripp and Tony Letier, who will be talking about designing ritual space. Bill is a principal in his own office. He's an adjunct faculty member at the University of Oregon and Portland State University. Tony is a recent graduate, a Master of Architecture from Portland State, and these two actually worked on as a thesis advisor and a thesis student, and have recently won the Van Evra Bailey Fellowship, which their proposal has to do with investigating the ritual spaces of Portland. So I would like to have them come up and give their presentation, although I see that the computer is now complaining it doesn't have power, so.
Yeah, I've got to say.
Tom? So glad we decided to record this.
This is the high-tech fix.
You have to also kick it.
Make sure you get that done.
Yeah, and this part. It's because I have a dirty briefcase.
All these PC people were like, oh my God.
There, it works.
Okay.
The breath of the compassionate.
So I don't need this one, correct?
You notice how I blew on it.
We'll edit out those parts.
All right, and so
You might give it another kind of virus.
Rebecca, did you steal our paper?
You took our paper.
You didn't know we do that at these conferences. At the
yeah,
last minute, we
take
take
the
our
paper
speakers'
away.
notes away.
That's great, I love it.
I'm blaming the Sudafed.
Okay, so we're going to be switching back and forth, so we just have a slight pause a couple of times to transfer the mic. All right, glasses. Okay, thanks so much for inviting us here. So our discussion is about this kind of subset of ritual space, which is memorial design. One of the most important tasks today is nurturing community. The forces of large-scale capitalism and our consumers' preoccupation are fracturing and tearing our social fabric. Society is becoming more polarized. It is only within community that we can live and prosper despite our differences. Rituals connect us to our roots, anchor us to our place, connect us to our heaven, and bind us to each other. Without rituals, there can be no family and no community. Within the tapestry of life and the life of a community, rituals are the golden threads. It's the timing of the conference is really interesting, being just after Memorial Day. And in rainy Portland, Oregon, this is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I attended the ceremonies there on a very wet and rainy Memorial Day. And you can see that the desire that people have to celebrate meaningful rituals, that they'll brave bad weather, whatever it takes. And I think that the other thing that we've noticed is that there's been an abundance of memorials, competitions and memorial projects in the last 10 or 20 years. And our feeling is that this speaks to people's need for expression of this connection to the spiritual realm through memorials. And that's why we're seeing so many, that people are just searching for channels through which they can express this aspect of their lives.
I'm sure many of us are familiar with Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's the names across the granite wall as part of the design, and people coming and taking rubbings and leaving flowers and offerings. These, however, were not part of the initial design. The need, it shows this need for humans to want to participate, for the need for community and the need for ritual. We see these offerings and these items and these gifts becoming more and more a part of that experience of the memorial. Part of it, that part that was not originally intended, has become a huge part of what we know and what we share about this memorial. We see the need to leave gifts happening all over. After Flight 93 in Pennsylvania, people came to leave offering, leave messages. We even see this more recently and more locally here in Boston, just following the Boston Marathon. The items have shifted as the police fences have moved and allowed and opened up the street again. This is just outside Copley Square. We see people coming there to reset the flags and put them back up. Some people have reorganized them, but some people leave them as they are. But the things still keep coming. People who see it day after day have even noted that there's still new things showing up. And so we are here to really understand this need for rituals and this distinction between memorials which serve as a backdrop and memorials which serve as with the ritual as an integral part of the memorial experience. To deepen and enrich the experience of a memorial, the designer has the opportunity to propose rituals, whether they're anticipated or spontaneous. And in some cases, some memorials come about through rituals that have had a long-lasting effect in the community.
In Portland, Oregon, the firefighters have a ritual each June to honor those lost in the line of duty. It's named after Chief David Campbell, and it's been performed for over 100 years. Help me out here. Great, okay. In Portland, this is the memorial site, and the firefighters decided to move the memorial to a new site on the east side of the Willamette River across from downtown. The new site is adjacent to an existing fire station and this dock where the fireboat David Campbell is meant to be anchored and will be used as a museum. The design concept was to line the riverbank with large blocks of white granite representing all of the Portland firefighters, past and present. And to involve the entire community, we proposed a floating platform down on the water. The river level fluctuates about 10 to 20 feet over the course of the year. Among the white granite blocks, and you can see the floating platform there etched, that's the existing fire station, are the memorial stones, and they're engraved with the names of the fallen firefighters, and then they're fountains so that water flows over the stones and drains down towards the river. And then each of them is bathed in light and lit at night. So to create both a memorial and a community gathering space, we used a gradient between sacred space and profane or secular space. And the idea is that the memorial stones and the bell precinct, which you can see here, does this have a pointer?
On the top.
Top.
On the very top.
Okay, so here's the bell, and this is a more vertical portion of the wall. So this is the sacred precinct. That's also the high water mark. This is showing the platform at about mid-level. So the community space remains close to the water down in here. And there again, so here's the sacred precinct is here up high, and then the community precinct down below. And here's a view of it at night. In New York City, St. Vincent's Hospital is sort of considered the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic in New York. And here, And it's being converted to condominiums. So as part of that project, the city required the developer to create a park, the New York City AIDS Memorial Park, which is on this site, and they had a design competition for that. So a local nonprofit group proposed this competition. They held the competition. So it's not uncommon to have memorials within parks, statues or obelisks that one sort of pass by on a daily basis. And perhaps people gather around them on special days and so on. But to incorporate the memorial function on a daily basis was our challenge here. To make the really this idea of reverential space a daily part of city life. Our inspiration came from the idea of an impact crater, the work of Andy Goldsworthy and Edward Western, among others. So the idea is that developing the design, we sort of took off on this idea of the impact crater, and we're showing the ground plane torn up at the corners. And that was developed into this idea of the exterior of the memorial being made of black ceramic-coated glass to represent loss and death. And then the interior of this bowl is paved in white granite and is the place of the park and represents life. As we developed this design, we looked at the idea of rituals and came upon the idea of an eternal flame, and then looked at various ways that the eternal flame could be used. Again, this is this balance in comparison to the David Campbell Memorial, where we separated the territory of the sacred aspects and the secular aspects. Here we combine them into one space. So we looked for a way to make the sacred function of remembering people that died of AIDS in some other method, and the eternal flame evolved into this idea of a bronze altar, a place for leaving offerings, and a place for people to write the names of loved ones on paper streamers and put them into the flame. And you can see around this, there are tears in the granite paving out of which the exposed earth trees grow. And these are also places for people to sit. There is also an auditorium component of the program, which we put underneath one of the corners, and you can see a view of this at night. So, to the extent that sacred ground can be more fully integrated into the urban fabric, we try and create places where time slows down, where people feel differently, they feel more connected to place, to the past, and to each other. And with this memorial park, we tried to create a place of daily reverence within otherwise dense urban fabric. As Tony mentioned, within days of the crash of Flight 93, people arrived. This was a chain link fence set up to keep people away from the crash site, to leave offerings. I think, and they showed up in droves. This wasn't a trickle. This was a real flood of visitors to this site. And we began to wonder why. The 40 individuals on Flight 93 knew about the other planes. They knew that they had really no choice but to act, and that they almost certainly would perish. These people died to prevent the destruction of the White House or the Capitol building. They were, in a way, instant and everyday soldiers. And I think it's perhaps the thought, it could have been me on that plane, which compels people to come. The crash site was at the edge of an abandoned strip mine, some 1,400 acres. So the entire property was dedicated for use as the memorial. It's a very large site. And as you can see, it's a vast, somewhat desolate landscape. It's just now beginning to kind of regenerate. So the separate lives of these 40 individuals were brought together by chance and inextricably linked. This convergence was the origin, or the essence really, of the concept of life paths. These are rows of trees across the landscape that begin at the sort of far corners of the site. Each avenue of trees is oriented towards the hometown of the particular victim. They form then separate entrances to the memorial. The species of tree for each row is chosen by the family of the victims to express some aspect of their personal history. The design of memorials must acknowledge that the perception and meaning of a memorial will change over time. Grief will diminish and memories will fade. Eventually, there will be nobody left alive who had direct experience with the event, or who even heard, shall we say, the family stories. So early, while grief is strong, these avenues of trees stand out in the landscape. And after several generations, the original trees eventually die and become absorbed into the forest succession. By the time all the family members who ever knew the victim have passed, the individual trees will have also died. So they're no longer distinguishable as individuals, but instead they leave behind a path through a dense forest, an avenue of light, if you will. The trees become more than a design element then, they become part of one's understanding of time. Trees through history, have this role of marking generations of human existence as opposed to individual life. These avenues converge on the sacred ground, so-called the actual crash site, where we placed 40 glass pillars which are lit at night. And to recognize the community formed among the families of the victims, the ritual design proposed that the life paths and the sacred ground be reserved exclusively for the family's own use on the morning of September 11th, on each anniversary. And this provides a place for gathering, for time together, and for sharing a common place of remembrance and grief.
As part of my research and design thesis at Portland State University, I explored Portland, Oregon's Veterans Memorial Coliseum. I looked at its history, I looked at its story. I wanted to find why this building had become so important to the community and so forgotten at the same time. You can see it here. The VMC, as we short abbreviate Veterans Memorial Coliseum, was constructed in 1960 and designed by SOM. And it was originally intended to become a living memorial. You can see from the articles, newspaper articles, from the historical archives, there was a lot of conflict and debate about its memorial aspects. However, the memorial aspects of this place were quickly forgotten with decades of concert and sporting events. When the city proposed to tear down the VMC, the community was outraged. They spoke up. They reminded the city that this place is a living memorial. And this concept of living memorials was developed after World War II. Traditional memorials typically served as reminders of the past. But we wanted to create living memorials as that which focused on the present. This translation led to many civic, spectator, and sporting arenas as memorials. The thesis investigation aimed to exploit the Coliseum's memorial aspects. By elaborating on these notions of time, community, and events, the proposed design evolved into a place commemorating the passage of time, a stone calendar in the center, in the entryway of the Coliseum. Each day a stone is laid to mark the passing of time. As the stones are laid in a continuous spiral, the circle of stones grows larger, indicating the pattern of days, making up each year, continuously, but not linearly. The past is no longer conceived as a sequence, but rather as a series of cycles. The basic cycle is the day, then the week, the month, the season, the year, and the generation. Through devising a calendar of events, the passage of time was translated into a ritual. It is not secular nor religious, but rather open to all communities to commemorate their special days as a collective group. Scheduled to occur each evening at twilight, public nominations would be made to allow the community to participate as part of the daily ritual and to personally connect to the physical memory placed in the ground each day. This living memorial design departs from the traditional standard by promoting the present through collective experiences, and the markings of time give way to the living. This diagram is part of the inspiration of the stone calendar and the design. It was just a graphic diagram to understand how time could be told and read as a cycle. And on the outermost part, we have the lunar cycle, which also is a part of how we can tell time, or how we have once told time. The next row indicates how much light we have each time. Each of these circles are made up of daylight and each of the twilights at the ends, gray bars, and then our evening. And as we move in, each row indicates a year, and the years continue to grow out. Right now, the red and the blue are indicating our basic national and federal holidays. And so as you lay time and events over time, you can see, for example, July 4th will always remain on July 4th. But we have Memorial Day, which changes which Monday it appears on. And so we can understand time, and we can understand when and how people can share a place and share a special place of events and their commemorative ceremonies.
Our final project that we're going to show you is a design competition for the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Most people consider World War II a so-called just war, and its soldiers, of course, worthy of honor and remembrance. The war was nonetheless a horrific event, and it left in its wake the specter of worldwide nuclear war. So we chose to use this competition as an opportunity to design a memorial taking on a more active role in the community, looking forward as well as back. The design, entitled World War II Memorial, a Memorial for Peace, was developed in collaboration with the writer Barry Lopez. At the time that we did this competition, Barry had just published a story called In the Garden of the Lords of War. Some of you may know that story. It has as its purpose the goal of preventing war and ensuring the peace. To do so, we needed a visible symbol to represent the decision to go to war, one that would resonate with the public and could not be ignored. In 1996, the time of this competition, the concept of paying tribute to all the individuals lost in a war had become well established, but it seemed impractical to carve all the names in stone. Our design is configured as a circle of trees on a vast altar of water, supported by a black granite wall. There are 50 trees, one for each state. The trees, their life and death, are used to remind those in power of the cost of war. As part of the design, we created ritual experiences for our elected leaders, as well as opportunities for spontaneous public rituals. We're losing power?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Yep, that's good. Each day of the year at first light, a United States Senator takes up several rice paper streamers. Each one is inscribed with the name of one of the fallen. The senator ties these paper cenotaphs into the branches of the trees. Over time, wind and the seasons take these inscriptions. If for any reason the senator can't perform this ritual, only a member of his immediate family may substitute for him or her. In this sacred grove, the color of the leaves, their size, and their abundance on the branches announce the cycle of seasons. The roughening of the tree's bark, the girth of the trees, and their height continue to measure the passing years. This living colonnade speaks to us each day of peace. However, if a president should decide to send troops into battle after declaring a state of war, he or she must cut down all the trees. And the stumps will remain for the duration of the war. When peace returns, sapling trees are planted again, and the ritual of honoring those fallen in World War II starts again from the beginning. Through cycles of war, the memorial becomes more than a place of memory. It becomes a storyteller, a teacher, and a calendar, illustrating the continual relationship between the past, the present, and the future in the life of our community. Memorials create this opportunity. They have this power to strengthen the bonds of community, to help us reconcile death, and ultimately to help us understand the meaning of life. Thank you.
I have to get Tom up too. Where are you guys? We need to hold several microphones up here.
Are you speaking? Yes. Okay, here.
Somebody else back there has this too. All right, how's this sounding? It's my pleasure to introduce Paul Tezar and Hei-Jung Chang for their presentation on reflections on the value of continuity in urban environments. Paul and Hei-Jung, most of you know them from their many times at the ACS, so welcome back. Paul's a professor of architecture at NC State, and Hei-Jung is a professor of landscape architecture at University of New Mexico. Welcome.
Thank you. I would like to start our presentation with a quote that may be familiar to many of you by Edward O. Wilson, also known to many of us as the Ant-Man. Man will be defined not so much by what he has created, but rather by what he has chosen not to destroy. I remember when I first read this quote, it really sank into me because I felt it expressed a deep sensed feeling that I had myself. The following reflections go back to experiences both authors had independently when visiting their neighborhoods of their early childhood and early youth after many years of absence. One in Seoul, South Korea, the other one in Vienna, Austria, only to find them so fundamentally changed that they were almost no longer recognizable. They triggered a dialogue. With the following thoughts, we resume and extend this conversation. Such personal experiences of disorientation and estrangement, perhaps all too readily dismissed as nothing more than sentimentality and nostalgia, may nevertheless also be symptoms of a deeper and more pervasive malaise. Many urban environments, certainly not only in the developing world, but particularly there, have been undergoing such swift and dramatic changes that their local identities as unique and culturally rooted places are either in serious peril or already extinguished. What replaces these environments that often took hundreds and sometimes thousands of years to evolve rarely betrays any connection to anything that has existed before them. It is the speed with which we accomplish such radical, meaning from the root, changes today that seem to threaten the continuity of human experience, and with it the sustainment of a sense of origin, a sense of place, a sense of identity, and a sense of belonging. In other words, of relationships to the environment that took a long time to develop and that we generally deem fundamental to the emotional and spiritual well-being of its inhabitants. A few thoughts on continuity and change. The coexistence of two opposing impulses, our need for continuity and our desire for change, appears to be a constant of the human condition. Pervasive and lasting continuity without change would leave us feel stagnant and stale. Pervasive and constant change without continuity would feel us rootless and confused. Indeed, change is contained in the notion of continuity. Continuity is predicated on the existence of something in time and therefore cannot be about immutability or permanence, but rather about the degree, the extent, the pace, the direction, and the locus of change within an enduring context. Many societies today seem to be almost intoxicated by notions of rapid progress and constant innovation inspired by our advances in science and technology. An argument can be made that science and technology, even if misguided at times, tend to develop to improved levels of insight and sophistication over time in a more or less linear fashion. The same cannot be said about the social and cultural structures of societies that are much more often characterized by cyclical dynamics and the re-emergence of old values that have been prematurely abandoned. This seems to be particularly true for our physical environment, both natural and cultural. In a call for papers for a recent EDRA conference with the topic of emergent placemaking, quote, successful placemaking is described as the ability to respond to shifting contexts in a world of increasing complexity, hybridity, and uncertainty. It suggests that places will not be able to survive if they cannot accommodate change, but makes no mention of the fact that placemaking needs to put at least an equal emphasis on another dimension, that of sustaining the continuity, stability, and identity of places under duress from exactly the forces of change identified above. Should we then simply conclude, because we live in a fast-paced, contradictory, and unstable world, that our buildings and cities therefore also need to reflect these tenets to somehow remain in alignment with them? Indeed, one is tempted to argue that the opposite should be the case, that our whole notion of place hinges much more on the second dimension of continuity, that one of the main anthropological functions of the places we inhabit, spelled with a hyphen between in and habit, the home on earth that we have created for ourselves, may actually be to resist these forces of rapid and constant change and to provide us with a modicum of stability in our existence, a refuge for the human body, mind, and spirit in a world that is in constant flux in so many other ways. If we can claim that the experience of continuity generally has some kind of intrinsic rather than just situational value in human-made environments, then in what other wider realms of human existence could this value be grounded? Where else does continuity appear as an intrinsic value? First, continuity has an evolutionary value. If we as a species succeeded to arrange the circumstances of our immediate environment with a substantial dimension of continuity, we also increased its familiarity and predictability, which represent a distinct advantage for the possibility of cultural evolution beyond mere survival. Second, our original natural environment from which we emerged as a species is characterized by a high degree of continuity. It is repetitive in its daily and seasonal rhythms, as well as in the stability of the forms of nature over long periods of time. We experience the ecological continuity of the natural environment as fundamental to our existence, and we feel protective of it. Third, there is value in the continuity of the transmission of genetic information from generation to generation. We pass on to our offspring information as we as a species have gained in a long process of interaction with the environment. Our genes continue to live on and give future generations the equipment they need to succeed in life from the start. Fourth, our experience of the world around us starts with the experience of our own self, our body, our mind, our soul, in our lifetime. While we age and change, we tend to perceive the continuity of our living identity, ultimately terminated only in death, as an intrinsic value. Fifth, we value continuity in human relationships. The success of families, friendships, communities, and human institutions are all predicated on continuity, take an investment of effort and time to develop, and are therefore seen as valuable and worthy of protection. Sixth, all cultures depend upon and value continuity in the form of traditions. Traditions have the functions to secure knowledge and insight gained by previous generations and to provide the initial starting point for the next one, thus enabling cultural evolution and indeed progress. Finally, when it comes to our spiritual life, we seem to assign a particularly high value to the dimension of continuity, as evidenced by our long-lasting adherence to core beliefs. The life of spiritual and faith communities, such as, for instance, the monastic orders, has often been shaped for hundreds and even thousands of years by the same enduring rules. To wit, the rule of Saint Benedict, 1500 years old. These examples may shed light on some of the general reasons why we may tend to perceive continuity as an intrinsic value. Obviously, this will depend on the specific set of circumstances in individual situations, whether our need for continuity will dominate the desire for change or not. It is suggested, however, that our existential investment, in other words, the duration, the depth, and the significance of our relationship with an environment, physical or otherwise, will have some correlation with the value we put on continuity, usually accompanied by feelings of attachment and protectiveness. At the top of the list then would be our natural and culturally involved environments, reflecting relationships that have lasted eons and millennia, and at the bottom, characterized by a greater openness to change, perhaps our economic, scientific, and technological environments. One of the significant characteristics of our physical, cultural, in other words, urban surroundings, has been their inherent material inertia. They took a long time to develop in incremental layers and they embody the history and the heritage of our culture, the enormous cumulative investment of many previous generations. While we have the means today to overcome and to conquer this inertia with the power of capital and technology, we always seem to do so at the peril of a profound disruption of our relationship to a place, experienced as the loss of something that has been valuable to our sense of origin and identity. The Swiss artist Jörg Müller brings these issues into a tangible focus with a provocative portfolio of images entitled The Changing City. Müller is an internationally recognized illustrator who was awarded the Hans Christian Andersen Award, also known as the Nobel Prize for Children's Literature, in 1994. Müller's children's book addressed contemporary human and social issues such as the loss of instinct and identity and general the meaning of life and the values we give it. In The Changing City, he depicts an imaginary, yet at the same time all too real urban scene. It could be really any medium-sized city in Central Europe, in a series of images separated in time by about 3 years between 1953 and 1976. If you look at the bottom, those are the titles of the images. They are simply the dates. It is worth noting that the original kind and gentle urban environment depicted in the first images is not one that appears to be of any significant architectural or art historical value. On the contrary, Müller seems to have chosen a rather typical and unremarkable place on purpose in order to underscore that even such ordinary urban environments, simply reflecting and supporting the daily life of a community, have great value in terms of our sense of place and identity. On their surface, the 8 images are characterized by a seemingly innocuous matter-of-factness, simply recording changes occurring due to new construction development in a part of the city. I particularly would like to draw your attention to this statue here at the center, and also to Müller and Meyer, two stores that are here, and sort of observe what happens to them in the process of change. It is not always easy to discern what exactly has changed from one image to the next, particularly not in the early years. But the further we progress in time, a troubling and alienating undercurrent becomes apparent. The statue is still there. Finally, when one compares the last image from 1976 with the first one from 1953, oops. It is like looking into two different worlds that have nothing to do with one another anymore. Within a period of about 2 decades, in other words, less than a generation, an urban community that had taken centuries to develop as a palimpsest of many diverse worldviews had been obliterated and replaced by a harsh and one-dimensional world dominated by blatant commercial values. Whether by intent or by default, the multitude of urban conversations that shaped the elements of the inherent environment over time, binding them together in a complex cultural fabric, were replaced by a monologue based on a single set of values dominant during a relatively short period of time. What Müller's images make visible is a dimension that tends to elude us in ordinary experience. We simply cannot perceive the insidious and creeping nature of change if we live in the midst of it. We notice its consequences only in retrospect, from a distance in space, in particular in time. The subtle progression of Müller's 8 images reminds us of the story of the frog that is sitting in a pot of water, you know it, being heated on a fire, perceiving only the small incremental changes of temperature from moment to moment. He does not recognize the right time to jump out and stays in the pot until the water boils him to death. Müller's work acts as a powerful reminder of an important function of our urban environment that we easily overlook, that it acts as a kind of collective external material memory in addition to the personal internal one that we carry around with us individually. Arnold Bellion, the philosopher, reminds us of this seamless continuity between us and our environment when he says, as an integral part of an environmental field, we both shape and are formed by the multitude of forces that produce the experiential qualities of the universe we inhabit. A physical interaction of body and setting, a psychological interconnection of consciousness and culture, a dynamic harmony of sensory awareness, all make a person inseparable from his or her environmental situation. Traditional dualisms, such as those separating idea and object, self and others, inner consciousness and external world, dissolve in the integration of person and place. Moreover, this external memory is a shared frame of reference that we experience together in our daily lives, and that ties us to each other as we live in this place at this time. It is essential for the development of our sense of place, our sense of community, our sense of belonging, in other words, for a good part of our sense of well-being. Müller's images depict the consequences of a radical rupture in this dimension of continuity in an environment. It serves as a case of urban amnesia and the loss of identity connected with it. I'm done now complaining about what is wrong with what we have done, but we don't want to quit on such a pessimistic note. I will now hand the baton over to Hye-jung, who actually will make some constructive proposals for a conceptual framework to guide our actions to prevent these distressing circumstances to occur in the first place.
So on the other hand, so if we believe that continuity in our urban environments cannot be achieved just by preserving our cultural heritage alone, but that our past needs to be given a continued presence in our deed of today, then we need a conceptual framework to guide our thinking. For this purpose, we offer 12 dimensions. We offer 12 dimensions of an aesthetics of continuity. First, inhabited livable dimensions. Repetition, the reoccurrence of the familiar in a variety of transformations. Our intuitive affinity to repetition and variation is probably rooted in our genetic and cognitive structures as they originally evolved in interaction with natural environment. Nature is endlessly repetitive and varied at the same time. We are attuned to the simultaneously perception of similarity and difference in things, and we take pleasure in it. Rhythm, the underlying structure and musicality of repetition, including its variation. Our experience of the identity of places is not only based on repetitive patterns of material and spatial characteristics, but also on the lively patterns of human activities that give structure to our experience of time in a place. Routine, the prevalence of the ordinary as the ground for the figure of the unique. Routines enhance the life of our souls because they allow us to deal with repetitive situations in a repetitive way, thus liberating our limited resources of attention to deal with unique situations. Routines set up the expectations that afford us the possibility and delight of surprise. Reciprocal communal dimensions. Reference.
You need to go to the next one.
Oh.
You forgot this one. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not a
Oops.
problem, keep on going.
Reciprocal communal dimensions. Reference, the new that contains a dimension of the existing. New elements of an urban environment have an opportunity to contribute to the dimension of continuity through various strategies of reference to an existing cultural context. Reiterating, redefining, refocusing, rereading, and refilling the existence with new meaning. Relevance, the possibility for an unmediated recognition of significance. Aspects of environments that are not perceived as relevant remain mute and inert and do not contribute to identification or understanding. Our environment is engaging to the extent that we perceive it as relevant to our existence. Relation, the structures of connectedness contributing to a sense of the whole. Unless there are recognizable relationships between the elements of an environment, we will not perceive it as a whole, but as an assemblage of disparate parts. Perceptual continuity among the parts of a whole reinforces the sense of a shared identity. Envisioned legible dimensions. Resemblance, similarity of shared features among families of things and places. Our cognitive system, formed by eons of interactions with the phenomena of our natural environment from which we emerged, has a particular propensity to recognize similarities among things. Resemblance among things promote a sense of continuity through familiarities. Recognition, the pleasure of encountering something familiar again. Recognition is literally recognition. That is, knowing something again. Encountering what we already know again established a level of continuity among our experiences. While we need the stimulation of the new to keep us alert, we also need the reassurance of the familiar to keep us grounded. Revelation, this discovery of the hidden essence of something. Revelations, while seemingly spontaneous, usually have a history of something that was present but obscure in our consciousness. In other words, revelations is not so much the discovery of something new, but rather the uncovering of something we have known all along without knowing that we knew it. Internalized empathetic dimensions. Remembrance, the presence of the past and its shared values in the new. Our shared memory of significant events or persons of our past can be kept alive by physical memorials or the periodic reenactment of rituals, reminding us of our connection to them, of their continued relevance of our life today. Reverence, the deep love and respect for the intrinsic value of life and nature. It is our ability to feel that which we deem notable, exalted, noble, exalted, and perfect, and to which we feel uninspiring affinity. Quote, there is something that no child brings with it into this world, and yet it is the one thing on which everything depends for a human to become human in the fullest sense. Reverence, says Guite. Resonance, finally, the sympathetic reverberations with our inner being. Quote, the aesthetic character of experience lies in perception, apprehended immediately and unreflectively. It is in this sense that we engage aesthetically with art and with the environment both, says Arnold Valiant. Urban experiences that intuitively resonate with us collectively depend on memories we share, like two bodies that start to reverberate in recognition of each other's presence. We like to conclude our reflections on the value of continuity in urban environments with what J.K. Chesterton had to say about the value of continuity when he calls tradition the democracy of the dead. Tradition gives vote to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. It is the democracy of the dead. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. All true Democrats object to men being disqualified by the accident of birth. Tradition object to their being disqualified by the accident of the death. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to introduce Jun-Sug Kim, Associate Professor at Lawrence Technological University in Michigan, presenting his paper In Search of Spirituality and Urban Decay. Professor Kim has run a Detroit studio, a community outreach studio comprised of grads and undergrads, working in Detroit for the last 12, going on 13 years. So, welcome.
Do I still need this?
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to show you a few slides to explain, I guess, little bit of a context and motivation behind my study. I hope that that gives you some ideas as to what on earth I want to study urban decay in Detroit. I'm sure many of you know a lot about Detroit already. As of this year, Detroit has about 100,000 vacant buildings. Now, it takes about $10,000 to remove each house. So 100,000 times 10,000, that's about what? About $1 billion? About $1 billion. That's a lot of money. Detroit right now has about $400 million budget deficit. Also, it has about $15 billion long-term debt. I don't know if you knew, Detroit right now is under the control of emergency financial manager. So the picture doesn't look good. So one of the crises we have in Detroit is that we have just so much vacant land. And we do have a vacant land crisis. And the darker the color, the more vacant lots you have in a given neighborhood. And you can see, I mean, the big part of the Detroit is dark, gray or dark. Some of the recent statistics tell us that about 40 square miles of Detroit is vacant. So, you know, there's something that we should think about. I'm sure you saw this Time magazine article, which was published 2010, I believe. And I mean, because of so much the shrinkage, urban decay, and vacant land crisis, we have received a lot of attention from all over the world. And you know, pictures like this, quite normal. You can take beautiful pictures like this anywhere you go, and you have a fantastic view of a, you know, downtown Detroit on the background. And this is actually taken in one of the abandoned industrial ruins. So I get to think when people in Detroit wake up in the morning, go to bed at night, it's very quite common for them to be exposed to, you know, urban ruins anywhere they go, and you know, in the morning, in the evening, at night. So I do wonder, what do they think? You know, what do they think about urban decay, urban ruins, and it's been that way for maybe for the last 6 to 7 years. And so I got really interested in understanding how people feel about urban decay and what actually they do. So I also thought that much of the media articles, many of the media articles have been focusing a lot on negative aspect of Detroit. But there are many things happening in Detroit that I consider something positive. Before I explain to you how I conduct a study, I'd like to explain to you some of the interesting findings from literature review. When you look at, by the way, I'm not an expert in spirituality. I simply got in this project based on what I do at the teacher studio. So when I look at some of the articles published for the last 10 years or so, you don't see, it was very hard for me to find articles that focus on spirituality in places in urban ruins. So I thought maybe I should, you know, maybe that might be an area that somebody has to kind of take up on. Number two, scientific rigor. I was encouraged by the fact that there are many articles that I thought rigorously done because they use grounded study, systematic inquiry, and empirical investigations. And that's something I didn't expect. but there are quite a few there, and I learned a great deal from those articles. I also saw a few articles that use cross-disciplinary and combined research strategies, which I think is useful, especially in the context of studying spirituality in Detroit. And place model, one of the jurors from one of the reviewers of my paper apparently didn't like the fact that I used the place model, but I found it actually useful because place model proposed by David Cantor in 1977, I think that's when he proposed. He argued that you have to study place, not just in terms of a place attribute, but also people's behavior and people's conception. So that, to me, that's kind of, I guess, a model that I think is useful if you want to study spirituality in Detroit. So let me just show you some examples as we proceed. So I used the in-depth interviews, focus groups, and some survey questionnaire also, and site observations. And now today I'm going to just show you some of the initial findings of interviews and focus groups. And I hope that I could include the outcomes of site observation maybe next year. So when I asked our study participants, how do they feel about urban decay, urban ruins? And obviously, I think people have a mixed emotion. To be honest, people have a sense of sadness about all the ruins they see when they wake up. But I also saw some interesting theme that run through many of the statements made by our project participants. And they talk a lot about some sense of spirituality in some of the most well-known urban ruins in Detroit. Not all the ruins, but some of the well-known ruins in Detroit. They feel some of them, they visit some of the well-known urban ruins as a place to pray and reflect on, their life and their neighborhood and so on. So that intrigued me, and then I asked them subsequent questions such as why you think some of the urban ruins are spiritual to you. And there are many reasons, and I found that there were 4 reasons stood out more strongly than other reasons. So I'm going to explain to you catalytic dimension, therapeutic, reflective, and engaging. Okay. So the first one, catalytic. That's how I define it. There's some places in urban ruin are considered spiritual because they encourage people to do something good. People do good things for their neighborhood, their people. It's very action-oriented. It's about above and beyond just talking about what they want to do. It's about something that they want to do it, even though the situation is really hopeless, but they still want to do something. So this is one example that has been talked about quite a bit. There is a major mural project in one of the neighborhoods in Detroit. It's called the North End Community. Just one day, people got together, worked with students and faculty and volunteers, visitors, all of them up, and they actually worked with the artists to create a huge, gigantic mural. And this happens to be not far from Teacher Studio, and this is one of the main roads where you see quite a bit of traffic throughout the day, and some people call it this falling the sun is falling down from the sky, but there are many people I talk about positive aspect of this project. This building has been abandoned for about 40 years, and by the time people got together, create this art, there was a strong sense of, it was around 2009, 2010, there was sense of hope, sense of change for future, sense of growth, and also bringing people together and making things happen. So that was good. But what is even better than that is that there are a lot of young people, young professionals, including artists, young architects, came together. Actually, some of them used to live in suburb neighborhood, decided to come to this neighborhood, working with people living here, and start making changes. So this is one of the positive outcomes of the catalytic mural project that you saw. Steve happens to be one of my students. He mobilized high school kids in their own neighborhood. By the way, it is part of North End neighborhood. They got together, worked with the children, and they spent several Saturdays and Sundays and throughout the year, clean up the building, abandoned building, and turn that into a piece of art. And this building is going to be a new home for ice cream store next year. There are many other examples in North End area. Now, compared to the example that I showed you, those are mostly action-oriented. In this case, this artist decided to make a strong commentary on ruins. In this case, he wanted to say something about ruins created by Packard Building, which is one of the well-known industrial ruins in Detroit. There are some other examples in Detroit. Moving on to next dimension, therapeutic dimension, which is to say therapeutic dimension has to be the places in urban decay. It can be spiritual because they are healing, they are consoling, they are comforting you. It isn't as active as the first dimension, but nevertheless it is important. People in my study project group told me a lot about some of the places they go as a place to reflect on what has happened to them, and also their neighborhoods and so on. And it isn't just about go there and cry and mourn, but it is also about planning next steps. And especially some of the well-known urban ruins have played a big part in the minds of these people in my study, in my project group. There's a very famous abandoned building in Detroit. This person talks about that, a new massive garden created in front of the empty building. In this case, he's talking about Michigan train station. And the garden and the station hill the old large scar of the city. So that's the train station. It was built in 1913. It was closed 1988. When this building was built in 1913, it was the tallest train station building in the world. And right now, there are some activities going on. There are some agencies working together with nonprofit groups to replace the windows, but still the main attraction in this case is a huge green space in front of the building. So this picture shows the very beginning stage of the garden project. Several years ago, New York Times noticed it. They did a wonderful story about these efforts. when there are some other examples, there are some other good urban ruins in Detroit. When you look at those examples, you notice that many of the popular urban ruins happen to have a green components. So because of the popularity of urban, landscape urbanism and some of the environmental study outcomes that came out of environmental psychology, because of their contribution, the therapeutic and the consoling aspect of green have received a lot of attention. I think it doesn't surprise me that green does appear quite often in some of the urban ruins. A few thousand miles away, this is an example in Germany, I believe, based on landscape urbanism concept. So what they do is they use landscape urbanism concept to focus on industrial ruins using green as a ground to promote artistic enrichments and the environmental remediation and cultural activities. I think it's a good model, and something like this is happening also in Detroit, which is encouraging. Reflective dimension. Places in urban decay can be spiritual because they help connect individuals to their selves. So compared to the reflective dimension, reflective dimension is more passive, I guess, and therapeutic dimension is much more active because you do console, you do listen carefully, console, and so there are some differences between this reflective dimension and the therapeutic dimension. It's been very interesting when I started run the teacher studio after Tom Berry left. 2000, there wasn't any tour group that shows urban ruins. Now, it's been just the last maybe 2-3 years now. There has been maybe 24 organizations that actually offer the free tours of urban ruins in Detroit. And every time I join some of the tours, I see like people from Japan, Germany, England, Netherlands, including people from other states. And I don't know whether they come because they like our malaise or sadness, but it's quite interesting. They get a satisfaction out of our unhappiness, but anyway. So it was interesting to notice that in our project participants, a lot of people talked about actually having part of this tour with their children offered by non-profit agencies, and had a chance to actually look at their neighborhood, urban ruins, and trying to make sense out of them. And it's definitely very educational and make you think about what has happened and what to do about in the future. So, boy, this is just a screenshot of the one of the website of one of the tour groups that offer tour. Now you cannot see here, but there is a title over there. It says "Fabulous Tour of Urban Ruins in Detroit." I think some of the study participants like the idea of storytelling as a way to connect themselves to their inner selves and teach them about what has been forgotten, and trying to build a sense of connection in some way. And even though ruins look terrible, but there's a memory there, and good and bad memories, and it isn't simply just being sad about what happened, but it is also about what they like to do in the future. I think it'll be interesting to know to use some of the storytelling techniques, PAL method, and ethnography that are used in social sciences. And those could be extra tools to, I guess, advance studies about spirituality, in my humble opinion. So last one, engaging. How much time do I have? How much time? Oh, 2 minutes. Okay, so I have to wrap up quickly. Engaging. Places in urban decay can be spiritual because they connect people in many different ways. So if you compare this to reflective dimension, you are connected to your inner selves. In this case, you are connected to other people through urban ruins. So that's a big distinction, very important distinction. I get this sort of kind from many of our study participants. The one thing that urban ruins do pretty good job is to bring people together. And especially, I guess, maybe in Detroit only, I don't know. So now that doesn't mean that after you get together, it doesn't mean something's going to happen. But still, it's very important for people to get together and at least acknowledge what their reality and think about what they should do. So this picture was taken in front of a very famous abandoned building. It's a global globe trading building that has a huge yard in front of the building. People gathered there to do 5K run. Now, the purpose is not just to have a 5K run. The idea behind 5K run is to engage urban ruins with the contemporary society in some meaningful way. So that's one way to engage you to, I guess, other entities, other people, other forces out there. So build a relationship, social relationship between the urban decay and anything other than urban decay. So I think studies done, especially in the field of environmental psychology and other disciplines, have shown that social interaction definitely promote public health. Social interaction lead to positive, social supports, positive attitude toward society, and also promote reasonable behavior. So I think there's something about social interaction that need to be promoted. That can be done also through urban decays, to believe it or not. So final slide. I think. I guess in my limited study of spirituality discipline in general, the therapeutic and the reflective dimensions are pretty, I think, well discovered, well studied, but I had a hard time finding studies about spirituality more in terms of engaging in catalytic dimensions. So maybe that's something that I like to explore in the future. Maybe I like to write more about, those dimensions of spirituality. I think, given the fact that cities like Detroit going through major shrinkage from 3 million to less than 700,000 people, Philadelphia, a bunch of other cities going through post-industrial stress and shrinkage, we should acknowledge urban decay as part of existence and reality, and rather than reject them, we should figure out a way to find some meaningful aspect of urban decay. So that's my conclusion.
Thank you. So already.
Oh, no, no, fine, yeah. Take this one.
Can we, should we leave? I guess it's not
I'm just filling in for a moment until Rebecca recovers. So I think I don't have a beginning question because I was deferring to Rebecca.
Let's
to
take
do
questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question?
that. Okay. No, I'll give this back over.
Aha. And I need to bring the microphone to you.
This is for Professor Kale.
Yes.
A few years ago, I went to a Smart Cities conference, and there was a lot said it was focused around agriculture and urban agriculture. And nowhere in your presentation did I see any reference to that. And I don't know what the state of that is, because there was talk about, you know, all this abandoned land, that much of which was quite fertile at one time, and that there was some movement at that time, and I don't know the state of it now, to turn a lot of that land into agricultural uses. And in terms of spirituality, I guess, you know, throughout history, there's been a lot of sense of celebration and ritual around the harvest and the bounty of the land. And I don't know if in your work or study that dimension, or if that's alive and well, or if that movement's taken off, or if it's just not gone anywhere.
Okay. Tom, when you were around in Detroit, before I can, was the idea of smart city popular there? Because I don't hear that much. I don't hear smart city ideas that much in Detroit right now. I think people are more worried about jobs. And
Well, this was to provide jobs too.
yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Jobs.
It was Joan Park who really started that conversation from Storefront. He moved out there for a while. All of a sudden, everybody was talking about kind of the re-greening of Detroit.
Yeah, actually,
We all caught the bug for a while.
yeah. You know, actually, I wrote a paper about smart city, presented at ARCC conference in March, and people thought that that's kind of crazy because we don't talk too much about smart city in Detroit. I thought this is a very important topic, but I think right now in Detroit, people worry more about financial crisis and the crime. And if you go some neighborhood, you just don't have street lights, and it's impossible for you to drive around and walk around. I mean, just basic, fundamental human dignity, related issues, like I said, safety, hunger, lack of access to healthy food and healthy lifestyle. Those are some of the major concerns: how to create jobs, how to create viable local jobs. Another interesting thing that is happening in Detroit is how to the controversial issues regarding large-scale urban farming. Detroit is one of the well-known urban farming towns in the country, but I think there is a perception there. When you talk to people in low-income neighborhood about perhaps using the idea of urban farming as a way to create healthy neighborhood, and some people don't like that idea because they think that urban farming kind of reminds them of their past history that they don't want to remember, the slavery and all that. So that I thought I didn't know too much about that until I actually confronted local people and start discussing pros and cons of urban farming. Although there are some neighborhoods actually doing quite a good job with urban farming, but as far as doing industrial scale urban farming, we're not there yet. I know that the city has been working on a drafting regulations as part of the zoning land use regulations. There has been a lot of resistance from the city, but right now they kind of came together and they came together finally, start discussing what to do about it, how we can create kind of new regulations. But I'm not sure if I gave you a good answer. But,
Thank you. Dennis had a question.
Two brief comments. Paul and Hejun, you chose the letter R to begin all your items, and I think that's the only letter that onomatopoetically has continuity. And if I were Julio, I could roll my R's.
Try it.
I can't. Bill and Tony, I thought your designs were brilliant, and I saw you placing some kind of space or form in an existing space, both in Washington and the 93 Memorial. And I'm curious about how that came out, to take that space, especially in Washington.
Well, I think as architects, we're always designing things for existing spaces, even in the middle of a rural area. But the World War II Memorial it's a sort of, for me anyway, it's a sort of the memorial that was built. I was just there actually a month ago, and I had a conversation with a park ranger at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And every time I go to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, I get very emotional. You sort of descend this ramp down towards the apex of the V, and by the time I get to the bottom, I'm usually in tears. And it has a lot to do with who's with me and who's around and so on. But I struck up a conversation with the park ranger there, and I asked him about this. And he said that happens all the time. He said that people become very quiet. They slow down, and they get very emotional. And then I said, okay, off the record, what do you think of the World War II Memorial? He goes, oh, that doesn't happen there. People play the kids want to go run and play in the pool. So I think for me that it's very sad what was built. It doesn't have a state of reverence about it, which I feel very sad about. I think that's one of the things, the simplicity, this idea of ritual and the idea of emotional connection to a memorial. The memorial has to leave an opening for that to occur. I think it's very significant, as Tony mentioned, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial wasn't designed with rituals in mind, but I think all of us recognize that it has really captured people's attention that way. I mean, and there's warehouses full of stuff that's been left as offerings there. But anyway, if a memorial has an opening, is the way I describe it, that then I can enter personally, or I can enter as a community or as a group, that's really the key. And I think, so in designing, that's the other thing, of course, that we felt in our design for the World War II Memorial was that this idea of the water. Not only did we try and make a reference to nature, so that from certain kind of angles you have what amounts to a small pond. It's that big. It was 250 feet or so across. But it relates to the reflecting pool to the Lincoln Memorial as well. So I think the existing context is always a part of, maybe Tony wants to talk about Veterans Memorial.
Yes, I very much felt the sensitivity with which you have developed
the places that you have shown us. But oddly enough, the question comes in my mind. Are we celebrating the transience of materiality and human being and human life too much? That is, we live in a very material world. We live very much in a me world. Is there a danger of overemphasizing the loss of something which is essentially very transient anyway? That is, we all die. Mm-hmm. The circumstances in which die matter. But I felt that every time there is some loss of a star, of an actress, of a leader, of whatever, there's then this wish to immediately celebrate our grieving by building these things. And in many ways, might we be perpetuating materialism and this material life, whereas in other societies, at some point, you accept that these happen. And you don't have to go about bemoaning it and celebrating it at such a high level. So it's like a question of caution.
Yeah, well, I agree, actually. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the lack of continuity that we spoke about. That's why we have this plethora of memorials. I mean, the number of memorial design competitions in the last 20 years, it's extraordinary. And so, I mean, we do those, right? That's some of what I do as an architect. But I agree with you 100%. It is the lack of continuity in our culture and in our world culture that really is, people are looking for any avenue they can find to connect to the spiritual realm and also to have some sense of continuity, because it's missing. And, you know, in all of the presentations, you know, showing us the state of our cities, what awful places we have made to live in, right? And they don't have continuity. And where people in the sort of the endurance of the human spirit to seek out in desolate places in Detroit, shall we say, opportunities for some creating places that people can create this spiritual connection in. I think that's, yeah, we have, you know, we've destroyed our planet in terms of ecologically. We've mined most of the energy. We've created inhospitable cities, and yet the human spirit is still seeking to make these kinds of places. So I think you're absolutely right, and I wish I wasn't so busy designing these.
Let's have the continuity team speak.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
About what?
Well,
Continue the conversation.
We could continue that conversation. Well, it seems like what maybe we're.
I think there's a question.
Is there a question back
There are
there?
some questions.
There's some questions.
Oh yeah, we all have things to say now. Okay, so Lindsay's hand, but you're standing up. You have a. Okay, and then Lindsay, and then I saw their hands.
Thank you for
Please take
your
your
papers. My name is Carla Britton, and I wanted to pick up on the last two comments, and I was thinking that many critics might say to us in this room that actually cities around the globe are not in a state of crisis, but many are enduring and thriving, and that Detroit has become so celebrated because it's the exception to the norm. And I'm wondering then if that means that we shouldn't be seeking new typologies for sacred space. And my question to all of you is, do you think that that's what you're doing?
What do you say, Tony? And then Paul.
So, to respond to that, and also to respond to the previous comment, I think that was a big part of how we wanted to approach presenting some of the memorials designs, that we don't want to, you know, we're not trying to design objects. And I think that's a big shift that when it comes to creating places of memory and memorials, that we're looking for something to be there, some sort of meaning, some sort of community connection, or some sort of story to the place, and not an object itself. And that it doesn't come down to just designing obelisks or walls or that, but designing something that has meaning and something that can hold on to generations well after those who were directly connected to it have passed. And how can that meaning and that memory be translated generation after generation, not through an object, but through a place, and through a place of meaning, and possibly through a community ritual that is shared, and that your memories become of that gathering, and you come together and you're sharing stories and you're sharing memories, and although your memories aren't the same as the next person, but you're there remembering at the same time.
Well, I'm not sure I have any particular answer to your question, except I'm interested in this notion of that you brought up of typologies or urban typologies. And I think typologies are a very good example of what Hye-Jung and I were talking about, because they are about continuity and they are about adaptation and change. Typologies don't stay the same. They adapt, they evolve, they absorb new influences, but at the same time they drag on, if you will, some of the things that have come before. And I feel that, you know, paying due attention to types, to urban types, to architectural types is a very legitimate way of thinking about architecture, not one that is particularly popular right now, but one that I personally happen to be quite fond of. So I feel, you know, we don't necessarily need to create new typologies. We can evolve the typologies that we have. Philip talked about, you know, the enduring value, or many people have talked about the enduring value of streets and blocks and squares and so forth. And I'm still not sure whether we have come up with anything much better than that, even though we have tried.
Question here. Or no, Lindsay, you had a question. Lindsay first, then you, sir. Take your numbers.
Thanks. I just preface my comments by acknowledging, since this meeting draws people of so many different disciplines, that I'm a historian of religions, not with the same background in architecture that a lot of you have, but I teach courses in ritual, and I was really enriched by all three of these talks. I mean, they all, to me, it seemed to be putting ritual in such a central position here. So the two things I won't pursue are this notion of, because I'm also a real aficionado of ruins, so, but like Mesoamerican ruins and things. So when you're raising these questions about urban ruins, particularly when they become a tourist destination, I will certainly corner you and talk more about this. This fascinating notion to me. And this thing about continuity and change is really rich, and ritual as a means of maintaining continuity. But it's really the first paper that put ritual so close to the center of what you're doing. And if I looked at this sort of in a positive way, which far overreaches the sort of the critical comment I would make, is that, you know, you're really doing it. You know, you're really creating ritual spaces in this rich way. And I really find myself in sympathy with these comments when you're sort of observing these the preoccupation with memorials, and the need to memorialize, and the need for ritual, and the need for participation, and all of this seems very, very important to me. But then I was remembering, I think Bill's last lines of his presentation was kind of a three-part formulation. You said ritual helps to strengthen the bonds of community, ritual helps to mark the passage of time, ritual helps us to understand the meaning of life. All of which I agree with, but each of which predicates a very different theory of ritual. So if you teach ritual, at first there's a kind of a Durkheimian notion about what's happening in ritual, and it brings community, it brings about social things. The second notion about marking the passage of time, that's a kind of an Iliadian notion of what's going on in ritual. You could, the last one about ritual helps us to understand the meaning of life. That's more kind of, you could locate that in the universe the way someone like Jonathan Smith talks about ritual, an environment in which to reflect on incongruity, he says, or something. So I mean, as I'm looking at this, and you're saying, you know, which ritual space worked, and so, sort of like this we didn't expect this. We got lucky in this, or the architects got lucky in this case, and this one didn't work, and so forth. But my inclination, as someone who's really been invested in ritual studies, we could predict this better. You know, a more nuanced understanding of what's going on in ritual would really create the means to facilitate the kind of work you're doing, which is really exciting to me in a lot of ways. So anyway, I'm happy for all three of you talking.
This is on the question of continuity, which I empathize with, but I'm also concerned that it could perhaps be problematic if we don't rethink our notion of culture. Because the way we define and talk about culture is we are able to define it only as something that has already happened. That's a sense of culture with your head always turned backwards. And we don't have an adequate notion of culture of something that is alive in the here and now. And without that, perhaps the impulse to continuity may be unfortunately degenerate into either orthodoxy or nostalgia.
I was afraid, I was anticipating a comment like this, and because I feel continuity has been fabricated in so many ways that are rather dubious. So I made a list of architects who I think have done it the right way.
All right, let's see.
Yes, I'm anxious. Okay.
Josef Plečnik. I don't know whether he's not as well known as he should be, but I feel he did a fantastic job of articulating continuity in architecture and being at the same time a child of our time. Alba Aalto. And I think one needs to predicate that it depends on the particular building and the particular set of circumstances, but I think certainly Alba Aalto's buildings do that. Aldo Rossi, I think, has tried something in this direction. Rafael Moneo, Balkrishna Doshi, you know, in terms of having an Indian architecture that ties to something that was before. Alvaro Siza in Portugal, Sigurd Leverens in Denmark, Gunnar Asplund in Sweden, Peter Zumthor in Switzerland, Gian Caminada, who is less known, but I think does fantastic work also in Switzerland. And then one of my colleagues in Vienna called Hermann Czech, who said, if it looks like an architect designed it, I've failed.
You forgot Lucan.
Lucan said it too?
No, but I'm saying you forgot Kahn.
Well, I forgot, Kahn already was mentioned,
Okay.
yeah. So I hope that, you know, clarifies that we are not necessarily advocating, we are advocating a Janus head, looking both ways. Patrick?
The three presentations provoked an immense number of questions in my mind. But Lindsay beautifully came to the rescue for a few minutes there. I wanted to make a couple of comments and then raise a question. The first comment is that for Mr. Kim from Detroit, many years ago, Robin Boyd, the great Australian architect, in an article called "The Suitcase and the Bunch of Grapes," mentioned that it is perhaps the single weakness of steel that it cannot make for picturesque ruins. Maybe that's why Lindsay likes the picturesqueness of Mayan ruins. But you brought out the fact that maybe Robin Boyd was totally wrong. That it does make for nodes of attention, at least, but only over time, and therefore ties into that whole preservation movement as well as other things. But Paul and Joe, you raised a connection, I think, between Bess's paper this morning and your paper today, because I was reminded that somehow modern urbanism seems to wallow somewhere between Sixth V and Hassan Fatih. Sixth V, as you know, like Napoleon and others after him, including Rockefeller, simply destroyed neighborhoods, cut right through them, and thus destroying the kind of community identity in many cases that you were talking about. In Albany now, some people are trying to resurrect that destroyed identity. But when Mr. Bess creates the axis, I don't know whether he's still here or not, the great axis, it reminded me a little bit of Sixtus V. And I wondered, now, listening to these papers this afternoon, what answer is possible to doing the same thing, it seems, now maybe it's not, but it seems to be the same thing over again, which instantly tends to destroy local communities of identity. And what would that do to the earth?
I think there's an answer back there.
There was a lot of excitement coming from an arm back there.
Philip wants to say something.
You want to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple things. One is that, yeah, 6 is the 5th is the immediate model. I don't know, it's hard to tell. I don't know the history of it, so I'd be happy to be instructed by the historians in the room. But my understanding was that the cutting of the avenues that connected pilgrimage sites in Rome, that a lot of these were actually through uninhabited areas, so that they were in effect creating areas. So that it's looking at old maps, it didn't seem anything nearly as radical, for example, as what Baron Haussmann did in Paris. And with respect to what we're proposing in Chicago, that kind of intervention was being done on the site of the interstate rights-of-way, so that the federal government had already come in and actually cut through those neighborhoods. And so, in effect, we were trying to reclaim land that had been lost. So, but the gesture was Baroque, for sure.
Paul has a comment.
Well, I'm not sure I can answer your question, Patrick. I'm not sure I can answer your question, Patrick, but I feel the notion of continuity includes keeping alive things as they happened in the passage of time. I think the only thing we were arguing against is sort of a radical eradication of something that existed. I feel, you know, what Baron Haussmann in Paris did is part of the history of Paris, and what we want to say, the medieval Paris needs to be resurrected. One thing that comes to mind is the city of Warsaw, as we know, was reconstructed after the war. It was very vividly debated in the architectural community whether this is the right thing to do. For the citizens of Warsaw, it seemed important that the center of Warsaw was actually there as it was before the war. I have seen, for instance, schemes for the old city of Vienna from the 1930s, where people wanted to raise the city literally and build apartment blocks, sort of a la post-war housing. In all seriousness, this was proposed. There are drawings existing. You know, when I saw that, I said I just could not believe that somebody in their right mind would ever have this idea. So, I think keeping things flowing and retaining things as they happened. For instance, I don't think I would be in favor of eradicating colonial architecture in the colonies to revert back to the things that existed before. They are part of the history and should be kept.
So I think when I think about urban design, it's one big remodel, right? One big continuous remodel. So the question is, what do you keep and what do you change? And any kind of remodel is done as needs change. This idea of continuity, I think, though, I'm searching for an image as you've been talking about it, and I have the image of a river delta. So what's continuous is the river. The shape of the delta changes by the seasons. So I think the same thing is true in culture, and the same thing is true in architecture and in the design of cities, that there are these threads of continuity, but the question is to discern them and to decide if they're material, if they're a built form that needs to be continuous, or are they, in fact, ideas, traditions, cultural traditions that then have different forms and shapes as time goes on.
With your permission, my second time I make an intervention. The purpose of our meeting is that there is something essentially happening with which we feel uncomfortable in our cities, in our architecture, and in the life that we're now experiencing. So therefore, our search together, that we all are sharing, how am I answering? I felt that from visiting Detroit to speak at the museum, which rivals the Metropolitan in its collection. But then you go and you see the rest of the city that you've shown. I thought that this was a city as an example of humility. That is how the mighty have fallen, how a certain path can lead you to this decay. So I would add to your wonderful list, humility. I think you can learn the lesson of humility. And I thought that this sense of humility related then to your ritual places. You know, as soon as 9/11 happened, the first experience was to build the tallest, biggest statement of materiality to show that, by God, we're going to keep on going to where we're going. Right? I mean, that was, and I think Lipskin's sort of, you know, arm rising and the new Liberty Tower, etc. But really what was, I think, successful is the nothingness of the memorial that was built, of just water going into the depth of nothingness. And so I wonder if this continuity or the spirit of the aesthetic image, and much of what you've done has this beautiful nothingness in it, is this expression of an aesthetic. We're looking also together for an expression. So just as the city of Chicago being rebuilt and how it wishes to be done, and we sort of all felt good and bad about it, to be honest about it. But I think this issue of humility is a very important aesthetic that I don't see enough about, because our life as architects, as the way we live, is that we've got to overcome nature, we've got to better this circumstance rather than acceptance. So my last point, these are observations, I apologize, is I felt your 12 dimensions were very intriguing. And my question to you is, how do you justify this process of identifying those 12? How did you get to the 12?
Your manifesto?
How did I come up with the 12? Yeah. Well, just happened to in my mind. I
want to know the rigor in of your investigation.
Oh, thank you for the compliment first. And I have thought about that a lot, whether this 12 dimension, like based on the 4 sacred number and 12 sort of cyclical number we all sort of seem to be familiar with, that would be easy, sort of giving nice, easy prescription for designers who really involved in making things, making of places. At the same time, the perceivers that who really experience the place we made. But again, that we can call descriptive structure or interpretive structure, whatever. But I think we designers, as sort of sense of wholeness about quality, what is good place. We knew it, the beauty. We knew it, we just felt it, and we just have to learn how to recreate into different settings, context. So anyway, we need a little description, detailed description about the quality we recognize or understand with the features and structure and forms and shapes that our designers tool, and what other aspects we can go deeper dimensions. So we designers develop the practical dimensions in general, and it's not really panacea for resolving all these problems, but I get just to provide the aspect 12, giving some sense of what would be. But again, when you ask how I came up with that, then I just loved it. R, some R's I found very intertwined words, and then the 4 aspects of the sort of essential characteristics of the spirituality would be internal and communal reciprocal something. So I just came up intuitively from the word that we seem to value a lot. And then it's our role to define the physical dimensions in relation to those aspects.
We're going to, Tom has ordered me to wrap up now during burning. Julio has a burning question. I do too, but maybe we're going to have to do that over dinner and that kind of thing. So let's thank our panel.